I'm East Africa correspondent Gabe Joselow, and I'm here to answer some of your questions about Kenya, Somalia, and Al-Shabaab. Now, one of the most popular questions we got online is who is funding Al-Shabaab? Where do they get their support? Well, traditionally, Al-Shabaab has relied on funding from the enormous Somali diaspora community. These are Somalis living abroad in Britain or the United States who are, for whatever reason, sympathetic to Al-Shabaab's cause. Now, the problem is it's very difficult to trace these transactions because a lot of them go through an unofficial Hawala network, which is a system of financial transactions that avoids big banks and is, doesn't leave much of a paper trail. At the same time, the United Nations has said Eritrea has been secretly funding Al-Shabaab for years. The idea is that Eritrea is trying to support the group because it is also battling Eritrea's biggest rival, Ethiopia. Of course, Eritrea denies all the allegations against it and has even accused Ethiopia of spreading these, rumors as part of a smear campaign. Well, the Kenyan government will tell you that it decided to go to war against Al-Shabaab because it had been provoked and because it was in Kenya's national security interest. Over the past few months, 2 foreigners have been kidnapped from Kenyan resort towns on the east coast, while another one was killed. 2 aid workers were abducted from the Dadaab refugee camps in northeastern Kenya, and Kenyan soldiers have come under attack in cross-border raids. So, Kenya blames all of this on Al-Shabaab militants and said it had to take action. As for why it took so long, well, the Kenyan military will tell you that it actually didn't. In fact, the Department of Defense said that the entire decision to go to war and all of the planning took place within 10 days in October. Now, there is speculation that some of this mission may have been planned months or years in advance, but the Kenyan government is sticking to its position that no, this was a spur-of-the-moment decision and it was a direct retaliation for these provocations. Now, we've talked about what support Al-Shabaab may or may not be getting, but there's also questions about whether Kenyan military is being supported by outside forces. The Kenyan military suggested a few weeks ago that it was getting help from its international partners, though it wouldn't name who. In fact, the Kenyan spokesperson was quoted as saying that there are certainly other actors in this theater, which is one of my favorite quotes to ever come from a military spokesman, by the way. Now, all eyes were on the United States and France, but both countries have denied any involvement. Of course, the United States has been training Kenyan army for a long time and has been providing logistical support for them, and also announced recently that it was sending unmanned drone aircraft into Somalia from Ethiopia for the purposes of conducting surveillance. But again, they've denied any involvement in the current operation. As for the African Union, AU forces known as AMISOM, there are about 9,500 of them up in Mogadishu on a peacekeeping mission. So far, they have no part in Kenya's operation, though the Kenyan government has said that it will rely on AMISOM forces as well as forces from Somalia's transitional federal government to maintain the peace once Kenyan forces eventually pull out. Now, so far, the UN hasn't come out in favor for or against Kenya's military incursion, but there has been some grumbling among UN agencies who are trying to provide humanitarian relief inside of Somalia. A lot of these agencies are providing food, water, shelter at a time when Somalis are suffering from one of the worst famines and droughts they've ever experienced. And they're concerned that a Kenyan military operation may complicate those efforts. At the same time, in the past, the UN has put embargoes on dealing arms to Somalia or Eritrea, and they've also had sanctions on individuals who are supporting Al-Shabaab. So yes, the United Nations is concerned about the war, but so far, they have stayed pretty quiet. Well, these are all really good questions. The thing is, over the past several months, there was every indication that Al-Shabaab was actually losing political support in Somalia. A big reason for this was because the famine and drought hit hardest in Al-Shabaab-controlled areas, and the group became deeply unpopular because it was preventing humanitarian aid from reaching those in need. At the same time, there were also reports of internal divisions within the group that were tearing it apart. But all that being said, Al-Shabaab actually gained a lot of support when it was fighting off Ethiopian troops during the last decade. And now it's using a similar campaign of propaganda against this Kenyan incursion, saying that Kenyan troops are violating the sovereignty of Somalia and Al-Shabaab is there to defending the country against these foreign invaders. Now, if the propaganda works and Al-Shabaab gets the support that it had against Ethiopia, then we could see a really prolonged conflict.